I lost everything at 30. The night a stranger. Changed my entire life. The night I lost everything started like any other ordinary Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. Just another long day that quietly chipped away at the life I had spent 10 years building. I remember staring at the clock on my office wall. 5:42 p.m. Everyone else had already left. The lights in the hallway were off, and the silence inside the building felt heavier than usual. That silence should have warned me. But when you're used to pushing through exhaustion, you stop noticing warning signs. I was 30 years old, and on paper, I had everything I thought I wanted. A stable job, a small apartment downtown, a car that still ran, and a life that looked respectable enough to make my parents proud. But the truth is, none of it felt real anymore. For months, something inside me had been cracking. And that Tuesday, it finally broke. My phone buzzed on the desk. I looked down and saw my boss's name, Martin Caldwell. I almost ignored it, but I answered. "Hey, Martin." His voice was calm, too calm. "Can you come into the conference room for a minute?" My stomach tightened. No one calls meetings at 5:45 p.m. unless something is wrong. Still, I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked down the hallway. Every step echoed. The conference room door was slightly open. Inside, Martin sat at the long table. Next to him was someone from HR. That's when I knew, you don't need words when HR is in the room. You already know the ending. "Please sit down," Martin said. I did. My hands felt cold. The HR woman started speaking first, a rehearsed voice, polished, careful. "Due to company restructuring." I didn't hear the rest. My brain had already gone silent. 10 years, 10 years of late nights, 10 years of loyalty, 10 years of believing that if I worked hard enough, things would eventually feel stable. And in one quiet conversation, it was gone. "We appreciate your contributions." Classic line. Everyone says it. No one means it. They slid a folder across the table. Severance papers. My job ended at 6:02 p.m. Just like that. No warning. No second chance. Just a handshake and a cardboard box. I packed my desk in less than 5 minutes. A framed photo, a coffee mug, a few notebooks. 10 years of my life reduced to items that barely filled a small box. When I stepped outside the building, the sky had already turned dark. Cold wind moved through the empty parking lot. I sat in my car for a long time, not crying, not angry, just numb. Losing the job was bad. But what I didn't know yet was that it was only the first domino. When I finally got home, the apartment lights were off. That was strange. Emily usually left the kitchen light on. Emily and I had been together for 6 years. We had talked about marriage, talked about buying a house, talked about the future like it was something guaranteed. But the apartment felt different that night. Too quiet. I walked inside. "Emily?" No answer. Then I saw the suitcase. It was sitting near the door, empty space in the closet. Half the hangers were gone. My chest tightened. I walked into the living room slowly. That's when I saw the envelope on the table. My name written in her handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a short note, 3 sentences. That was all. "I can't do this anymore. You're always stressed, always distant. I need a life that feels alive." There was no anger in the words, no drama, just quiet resignation. She had already left. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second echoing in the empty apartment. Job gone, relationship gone, future gone, all in the same night. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall for a long time. Not crying, not moving, just breathing, barely, 30 years old. And suddenly everything I thought defined my life had disappeared. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang again. My heart jumped. For a moment, I hoped it was Emily. It wasn't. It was my landlord. I answered. "Hey!" His voice sounded awkward. "I hate to bring this up tonight, but bad words always start like that. I need to remind you that your lease renewal payment is due tomorrow." Of course it was. I had forgotten, because I thought I had a job. "I'll take care of it," I said. But as soon as I hung up, reality hit. I opened my laptop, checked my bank account. The number on the screen made my stomach drop. After rent, after bills, I had maybe 2 months. 3 if I lived like a ghost. That was the moment fear finally arrived. Real fear. The kind that sits in your chest and refuses to leave. I stood up suddenly. I couldn't breathe inside that apartment anymore. Every wall reminded me of something I had lost. So I grabbed my jacket, my car keys, and walked out into the cold night air. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there. I drove for almost an hour without thinking. City lights blurred past my windshield. Music played softly on the radio. But I wasn't listening. My mind replayed the day over and over again. The meeting, the note, the empty closet. Everything collapsing like a house of cards. Eventually, I pulled into a small roadside diner outside the city. The kind of place that never really closes. The neon sign flickered. The parking lot was half empty. I sat in the car for a moment, then finally stepped out. Cold air hit my face. Inside, the diner smelled like coffee and fried food. Warm, comforting. I slid into a booth near the window. A waitress poured coffee without asking. "You look like you've had a day," she said gently. I forced a weak smile. "You could say that." She nodded like she understood, then walked away. I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee mug. For the first time that night, I felt something close to calm. I didn't know it yet. But that quiet diner was where everything in my life was about to change. Because 10 minutes later, a stranger would walk through that door, and nothing after that moment would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had to, but because something inside me wouldn't let me sleep. You know that feeling when your mind keeps replaying the same moment over and over again? That was me. I kept hearing my own voice from the night before. "Take care of your mother." And then Ethan's silence. That silence sat in my chest like a rock. I got up quietly, trying not to wake anyone. The house was still dark. The early morning light from outside barely slipped through the kitchen window. I poured myself a cup of coffee. And for a moment, I just stood there staring at the steam rising from the mug. Thinking. Wondering if I had just pushed my brother away forever. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, heavy. I turned around. It was my mom. She looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. "You're up early," she said softly. I forced a small smile. "Couldn't sleep." She sat down at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around her coffee mug like she was trying to warm herself from the inside out. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question I had been dreading. "Did Ethan come home last night?" I nodded. "He did." "And?" I hesitated. "He's thinking about it." She didn't look surprised. She just nodded slowly. I figured. Then she looked out of the window. I know I haven't been easy to live with lately. That sentence hit me harder than anything else, because it wasn't true. Not really. Life had been hard, not her. Mom, I said quietly, sitting across from her, you're not the problem. But she didn't answer, and that silence told me something I hadn't realized before. She believed she was. Later that afternoon, Ethan texted me. Just 3 words. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. When? His response came almost instantly. Now. We met at a small park a few blocks away from the house, the same park we used to go to as kids. Back when life was simpler. Back when our biggest argument was about who got the last slice of pizza. Ethan was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench near the basketball court, watching some kids play. For a moment, he didn't look like the confident guy everyone knew him as. He looked lost. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke right away. Finally, he said, without looking at me, You really meant what you said last night, didn't you? Yes. He rubbed his face with both hands. I don't know if I can do this. His voice cracked slightly. And that was new. Ethan never let people see that side of him. I'm barely keeping my own life together, Sarah, he said. I've got bills, work stress, a relationship that's already hanging by a thread, and now this. I know, I said quietly. No, I don't think you do, he replied, turning toward me. You've always been the strong one. That made me laugh, a small, bitter laugh. Strong? I said. Ethan, I'm terrified. He looked confused. Of what? Of losing this family. That made him go quiet again. A basketball bounced in the distance. Kids laughed somewhere across the park. Life moving forward like nothing was wrong. I feel like everything is falling apart, I continued. Dad's gone. Mom's barely holding herself together. And you. I stopped. And me what? He asked. And you're already halfway out the door. That one hurt him. I could see it in his eyes. But sometimes the truth hurts, and sometimes it needs to. Ethan leaned back on the bench and stared up at the sky. I didn't plan to become the guy who runs away, he said after a while. But sometimes it feels like if I stay, I'll drown too. I nodded slowly. I get that. He looked surprised. You do? Yes. I took a deep breath. Every night after everyone goes to sleep, I sit in the living room and wonder if I'm strong enough to keep doing this. And, he asked, and every night I decide to try again tomorrow. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he asked a question I didn't expect. Do you ever resent me? That question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly. Sometimes. He nodded like he already knew. That's fair. But I don't hate you, I added quickly. Not even close. Then why did it sound like you were blaming me yesterday? Because I was scared, I admitted. Scared that you were giving up on us. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'm not giving up, he said quietly. I'm just overwhelmed. I believed him. For the first time since that conversation started, I actually believed him. Then he said something that changed everything. I talked to my boss this morning. My heart skipped. And? He said I might be able to work remotely a few days a week. That was unexpected. I'm not promising anything yet. Ethan added quickly. But I'm trying to figure something out. For the first time in days, I felt a small spark of hope. You don't have to fix everything overnight, I said. Just don't disappear. He looked at me, really looked. You always think I'm going to leave. Because sometimes it feels like you already have. That one sat between us for a moment. Heavy. Real. Then Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He pulled me into a hug. Not the quick, awkward kind, a real one. The kind siblings give when they remember they're on the same team. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for making you carry everything alone. My eyes burned. You weren't supposed to hear that, I said. Hear what? That I'm scared too. He pulled back and gave a small smile. You know what's funny? What? I always thought you had everything figured out. I laughed. Yeah, so did everyone else. The sun was starting to set by the time we left the park. Orange light stretching across the sky. When we got back to the house, Mom was in the living room, watching an old movie she probably wasn't paying attention to. She looked up when we walked in together, and something in her expression changed. Not relief exactly, but something close to it. Ethan walked over and sat beside her. Then he said something simple, but powerful. Hey, Mom. She smiled, and for the first time in weeks. The house didn't feel quite so heavy, but what none of us knew yet was that the hardest part of our story hadn't even begun, because 3 days later, the phone call came, and that phone call would change everything. 3 days later, the phone rang. It was a normal afternoon, or at least it started that way. I was in the kitchen helping Mom sort through a pile of unopened mail. Bills, insurance letters, hospital paperwork. The kind of stuff that seems to multiply when life is already heavy. Mom hated opening those envelopes. Every one of them reminded her that things were not the way they used to be. Ethan was upstairs in his old room, trying to take a work call. Since our conversation at the park, he had started spending more time at the house. Not officially moved back in, but he was around more. Quietly trying. That alone meant more than I could explain. The house was unusually calm that day. Then the phone rang. It was Mom's phone. She looked at the screen and frowned. I don't recognize this number, she said. Normally she would have ignored it. But for some reason, she answered. Hello? Her voice was polite, careful. I kept sorting the envelopes, half listening. Then her expression changed. You know that moment when someone hears something they were not prepared to hear? Her shoulders stiffened. Her hand gripped the edge of the table. Yes, this is she said slowly. There was a long pause. I looked up. Mom? She held up a finger, asking me to wait. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. He's alive? The envelope slipped from my hand. What? I whispered. Mom wasn't looking at me anymore. Her eyes were wide, staring at nothing. Yes, she said into the phone. Yes, I understand. Another pause, then her voice cracked. After all these years? My heart was pounding now. I stood up. Mom, what's going on? She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly lowered the phone and just sat there, silent. I walked closer. Mom! She blinked like she had just come back from somewhere far away. That was a hospital in Phoenix, she said quietly. My brain struggled to catch up. Phoenix? Why would a hospital in Arizona call you? Her next words felt unreal. Your father is there. For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. except Mom never joked about things like that. "What do you mean Dad is there?" I asked. "We buried Dad," I said. My voice was shaking. "We had a funeral. We said goodbye." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "They made a mistake," she whispered. Just then, Ethan came downstairs. "Why is it so quiet in here?" He looked at both of us. "What happened?" Neither of us answered right away. Finally, I said it. "They say Dad is alive." Ethan blinked. Then he laughed. Not because it was funny, because it made no sense. "That's not possible." "I know," I said, "but that's what the hospital said." Mom slowly slid the phone across the table toward us. "They want us to come." The room felt smaller suddenly, heavier. Ethan picked up the phone and looked at the call log. Then he looked at Mom. "What exactly did they say?" She wiped her eyes. "They said a man was admitted 2 days ago after collapsing at a bus station." "Okay," Ethan said cautiously. "He had no ID, no wallet, nothing." "And?" I asked. "He was unconscious when he arrived," Mom continued. "But when he woke up, he gave them my name." Ethan's expression changed. "And our last name." Silence. Deep silence. "They ran a background search using the information he gave them," Mom said, "and somehow they found my number." My head was spinning. "This doesn't make sense." Ethan nodded. "It doesn't." Then he asked the question we were all thinking. "What if it's not him?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "They said he knew details about our family." My chest tightened. "Like what?" She looked at me. "Your childhood nickname." My breath caught. Nobody knew that. Not many people, anyway. Ethan stood up and started pacing. "This is insane." "But if there's even a chance," Mom said. Her voice broke again. "If there's even a chance it's really him?" None of us finished the sentence, because the possibility alone was overwhelming. Dad had died. At least that's what we believed. 3 years ago, a car accident, closed casket funeral. Everything had felt rushed, but at the time, we were too numb to question it. Now, everything felt uncertain. Ethan stopped pacing. "We need to go." I looked at him. "To Phoenix?" He nodded. "If this is some kind of mistake, we need to know." "And if it's not a mistake..." He didn't finish. Mom looked terrified and hopeful at the same time. Two emotions that almost never live in the same place. "How soon?" I asked. "They said as soon as possible," Mom replied. Ethan checked his phone. "I can book flights tonight." Then he looked at me. "Are you ready for this?" Honestly, no, not even close. But some moments in life don't give you time to prepare. "They said he keeps asking for us," Mom said quietly. That sentence sealed it. Within 2 hours, Ethan had booked the tickets. We were leaving early the next morning. That night, nobody slept much. Mom kept pacing the hallway. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, but not working. And I sat on the couch, staring at old family photos, trying to remember Dad's voice, trying to imagine what I would say if the man in that hospital bed really was him. Because if he was alive, then everything we believed about the last 3 years might be wrong. And if everything was wrong, then the truth waiting for us in Phoenix could be even harder to face. The next morning, we left before sunrise. 3 tickets, 3 people, and 1,000 unanswered questions. But none of us were prepared for what would happen when we finally walked into that hospital room. Because the man lying in that bed was not the father we remembered. And the story he was about to tell us would tear our family apart before it could ever put it back together again. The flight to Phoenix felt longer than it actually was, 3 hours in the air. But inside my head, it felt like 3 years. Mom sat by the window, staring outside almost the entire time. She barely spoke. Every once in a while, she would close her eyes, like she was trying to prepare herself for whatever waited at the end of that flight. Ethan sat next to me. Normally, he was the type who filled silence with jokes or random comments. Not this time. He just stared at the seat in front of him, arms crossed, jaw tight. I think all three of us were thinking the same thing. What if this wasn't him? What if we flew across the country only to find a stranger who happened to know a few details about our lives? But there was another question none of us said out loud. What if it really was him? And if it was, why had he been gone for 3 years? When the plane landed, the Arizona sun was already low in the sky. Warm light poured through the airport windows. Everything looked calm, normal, which felt strange considering how chaotic everything inside me felt. We rented a car and drove straight to the hospital. The entire ride there, Mom held a small photo in her hands. An old picture of our family from years ago. Dad standing behind us with his arms around our shoulders, smiling. Back when everything still made sense, when we pulled into the hospital parking lot, none of us moved for a moment. Ethan finally exhaled slowly. "Well," he said quietly, "this is it." Mom nodded, but her hands were shaking. I reached over and held one of them. "We'll go together." Inside the hospital, the air smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Bright white lights, quiet hallways, the kind of place where every step feels louder than it should. At the front desk, Ethan gave the nurse the name the caller had mentioned. She checked her computer, then looked up at us. "You're the family?" Mom nodded. The nurse's expression softened. "He's been asking for you." My chest tightened. The nurse gave us directions down a long hallway. Room 417. Every step toward that door felt heavier than the last. When we reached it, we stopped. Nobody reached for the handle right away. Because once that door opened, there would be no going back. Finally, Ethan pushed it open. The room was quiet. Machines hummed softly. And there, lying in the hospital bed, was a man who looked both familiar and completely different at the same time. He was thinner, older, his hair almost completely gray now. But when his eyes opened, I knew. "Dad," I whispered. His eyes filled with tears instantly. "Sarah," that was it. That one word. And suddenly, the room felt like it was spinning. Mom covered her mouth. Ethan stepped forward slowly. None of us could move for a moment. Then Mom finally rushed to his bedside. "Oh my God," she whispered, gripping his hand. "Oh my God." Dad's eyes moved from her to Ethan, then back to me. "I tried to come back," he said weakly. His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken much in a long time. But things went wrong. We pulled chairs close to the bed. None of us knew where to start. Finally, Ethan asked the question sitting in all our minds. "What happened?" Dad closed his eyes for a moment before answering. 3 years ago, the night of the accident. His voice trembled slightly. "I wasn't supposed to survive that crash." We listened without breathing. When the car hit the guardrail, I blacked out. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. "That's what we were told," Mom said. "But the hospital made a mistake," Dad continued. They mixed up records, thought I was someone else. That sounded impossible. But hospitals make mistakes sometimes, rare ones, life-changing ones. They transferred me to another facility, he said, but I had a head injury. I couldn't remember much. Amnesia? Ethan asked. Dad nodded slowly. For a long time, I didn't even know my own name. The room was completely silent. Months had passed, then more months. Eventually, small pieces of memory started returning. But by the time I remembered you, Dad continued, I had no idea where to find you. No phone, no wallet, no documents, just fragments of memories. And when I finally started trying to trace my life back, he said quietly, I learned that my family had already buried me. Mom began crying softly. Dad squeezed her hand. I thought it would destroy you to reopen that pain. So you stayed away? Ethan asked. There was anger in his voice, not loud, but real. I didn't know what the right thing was, Dad admitted. So I waited, trying to rebuild enough of myself to come back. But the truth is, his voice cracked. I was afraid you had all moved on. None of us had, not really. Grief doesn't disappear, it just hides inside you. Then Dad looked directly at me. I finally remembered your mother's maiden name 2 days ago. That's how the hospital found you. Everything suddenly made sense. 3 years of confusion, of grief, of unanswered questions, all leading to this moment. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. I spent 3 years being angry at a ghost, he said quietly. Dad looked at him. I know. I thought you left us, Ethan continued. I thought you chose not to stay. Dad's eyes filled with tears again. I would never choose that. The tension in Ethan's shoulders slowly faded, and for the first time since we entered the room, he stood up and stepped closer to the bed. Then he did something I hadn't seen since I was a kid. He hugged Dad, carefully, but tightly. I missed you, he said. Dad closed his eyes. I missed you too, son. We stayed in that hospital room for hours, talking, crying, laughing at memories, rebuilding something that had once felt permanently broken. Later that night, as the sun set outside the hospital windows, Dad looked around at all of us. You know something? He said quietly. What? Mom asked. For 3 years I thought I had lost my entire life. He paused. But sitting here right now, I realized something. What's that? I asked. He smiled gently. I didn't lose it. We just had to find our way back to each other. And in that moment, after all the fear, confusion, and pain, I realized something too. Sometimes life falls apart in ways we never expect. Sometimes the people we think we've lost forever come back in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes, the moment that feels like the end of everything is actually the beginning of something stronger than before. Our family walked into that hospital broken, confused, exhausted, but that night, for the first time in years, we walked out together. Not perfect, not healed overnight, but together, and sometimes that's more than enough.